Okay, it's 11 o'clock, so I suggest we'll make a start. There's still a few people joining the session, but we'll start on time. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to this SEWSCAP event for the Supply Chain Sustainability School. I'm Sean McCarthy. I chair the board of the Supply Chain School and support various projects around the school agenda. Very happy to be involved in today's session. I think it's a really groundbreaking event that we have here today. We're looking at the Future Generations Wales Act, which by its nature is explaining global leadership for people and how we might be able to support that in a better way. I'm not going to be saying very much today. I'm really here today as Master of Ceremonies, just to help the session go well. I assume that most of us these days are familiar with the various platforms we use. We're on Microsoft Teams today. So do feel free to use the chat function if you have any questions or any comments as we go through the day. We will be wrapping today's session and trying to answer questions and to address issues in the best way that we can. I would ask you please to be on mute just to make sure that we don't have too much background noise or any strange echoes on the audio. But do feel free, as I say, to use the chat function in Microsoft Teams to participate and to ask us your questions. So my colleague Rosie is on the call. She's driving the slides that you see in front of you today, and we're also going to be running a poll at the end of today's session. We are recording the session, so you'll see a note on the screen now to say recording has started. So by joining, you are giving your consent for this session to be recorded. We will make that available at a later date on the Supply Chain School website for future people who aren't able to attend today to catch up with what's being said. Okay, without further ado, let's move on to the next slide, Rosie. Okay, so we are going to be using Menti today. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but what you can do on a separate device or on a separate window in your browser, if you go to menti.com and put the code in that's on your screen in front of you, we will be asking you to participate in a bit of a survey later and give us your reaction to the event, so we can start to get some comments back from you. We will remind you of the website and the screen when we get to it at the end of the event. So if you'd like to join now, please feel free to do so, but there will be an opportunity to join a little bit later. Okay, next slide, Rosie. So this is the Supply Chain School in Wales. It's been a great success. We have the partners that you see on the screen in front of you. You're going to be hearing from many of those today, because there's a recognition that we can leverage the benefit of the Supply Chain School across the UK, the technology platform that we can provide, the learning content that we can provide, the marketing, etc. But recognise that there are a whole lot of different policies, different legislation in Wales, and things that we need to address that are specific to that region. So for some years now, we've had a really successful Welsh school. We have followed that up later with a school in Scotland, again, where things are different. So we can get the best of both worlds. We can actually arrive at a set of resources and promotion and events like this that are very specifically Welsh. But we can take advantage of the way that the school is funded across the board and the technology platform that we can provide to everybody. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide, please, Rosie. So this is the Supply Chain School, for those of you that aren't familiar with it. It's very much a common approach to assessing your sustainability competence and developing suppliers' sustainability knowledge. There's actually more than just sustainability in the school these days. We have schools for management, for BIM, for digitization, for lean construction, off-site construction, etc., etc. So it's a huge opportunity. It's a one-shot at learning for free. Everything that we deliver in the school is delivered free of charge. Moving on. So what have we done in Wales? Launched in 2016. You can see the numbers in front of you here. So we're delivering big numbers in Wales of upskilling people, and particularly focusing on the Future Generations Act as we are today, and sustainability in Wales. We've built a learning pathway for SEWSCAP. You'll be hearing from SEWSCAP very soon for that framework. So very specifically, if you're on the SEWSCAP framework, here are some things that's very beneficial to learn for that supply chain. And the next slide. I love this quote. This is a quote from the United Nations. We hope that what Wales is doing today, the world will do tomorrow. Action more than words is the hope for our current and future generations. I'm not Welsh, but I'm incredibly proud to be able to bring the resources and the support of the Supply Chain School to support this type of initiative. It really is the way forward. And the next slide, Rosie. Okay, so this is the agenda for today. A little bit of welcome and context, which I've pretty much covered. Then we're going to be handing over to our colleagues from SEWSCAP to set the scene. We're very honoured to have Sophie Howe, the Commissioner for Future Generations Wales Act, to provide us with a keynote speech immediately after that scene setting. Then we're going to be into some case studies. So a series of case studies to understand how our various partners are actually supporting the Act and aligning with the Act. A bit of a break at 12 o'clock. We're going to hear a social value case study from Street Games, and then some more partner case studies as we go through into the afternoon. Then we're going to ask you to interact a little bit and start to get involved through the Menti poll, so we can start to understand what more can we do. How can our supply chains actually work together to start to really deliver on the objectives that are set in the Act. So that's our plan for today. I'm going to hand over now to our colleagues from SEWSCAP to introduce the day and to set the scene. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. So if we go on to the next slide, please. That's great. So just a bit of an overview on SEWSCAP and South East Wales Highways, the two frameworks that we predominantly run in Cardiff Council on behalf of South East Wales and the wider Welsh public sector. Myself, Chris McClellan, Senior Category Manager and Framework Manager, and this is the team within Cardiff. Kevin's on the call. Penny will be presenting with me, and then we have Kat Griffin and Carl Boucher, who are new members of the team who have joined just recently. Next slide, please. So for those of you who don't know what SEWSCAP and South East Wales Highways is, we've included the civils framework as well. But predominantly, these are two frameworks that are actually in their third iteration and were created with a very illustrious legacy by Rhondda Cynon-Taf. So this is the third iteration of both frameworks that we took on board and ran the procurement for about 18 months, 2 years ago. They were established. They're very good frameworks. Cardiff used them heavily as a council in our own right, but they were put in place over 8 years ago by Rhondda Cynon-Taf, RCT, and you know, we were very, very proud to pick up the re-procurement in the third iteration of them. SEWSCAP is predominantly used for 21st century schools, Band A, Band B programme for the built environment, and the South East Wales Civils framework, a lot smaller framework there, £130 million spend estimated, with 15 contractors and 11 lots. On SEWSCAP, we got 26 contractors across 11 lots, and we do encourage modern methods of construction over traditional, you know, leading into modular builds as well. And part of the reason for taking on the frameworks as well was the fact that they are both aimed at predominantly sustainability and being around for the duration. And part and parcel of re-procuring these frameworks was that we started to look at engagement with, for example, the Supply Chain Sustainability School and the National Association of Construction Frameworks to share best practice in South East Wales. and the wider Welsh public sector in terms of promoting sustainability, best practice, and modern methods of construction to enable. And this is part of the reason why we felt that this event would be really, really useful for decision makers to come onto the call and potentially understand how these projects that are delivered on a local level are actually contributing to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Next slide, please. Right, thank you. So this is a very busy slide, and this is actually put some context into the policy drivers and initiatives on a Welsh Government national level. And obviously, for many years, the community benefits delivering maximum value for the Welsh pound has been around since about 2013. And prior to that, we had the Opening Doors Charter for SME-friendly procurement. These policies absolutely set the groundwork in preparation for the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the Social Services and Wellbeing Act in 2014, and a lot of incorporation of some of the benefits of these acts and policies were put into place within the setting the frameworks when they were going out to tender, and this was on iteration 2. So essentially, we've looked at the community benefits piece for a number of years. We have the code of practice, which has been brought in more recently as well, which tries to look at the issues around modern slavery, human rights, blacklisting, etc. And therefore there's a wide wealth of legislation and policy that sort of set the ground ready for the frameworks when we came into iteration 3. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. This slide just really presents what goes on a local level. So you have the national policy and legislation, and then the lenses that local authorities then take on board and put out into their builds, into their road schemes, into their big goods and services and works procurements. And this just shows that obviously within South East Wales, we obviously have the Cardiff capital region. Local authorities around the patch all have their own procurement strategies and own policies and procedures trying to build economic growth, investment, creation of jobs within their own regional aspects. And this just shows that the frameworks are sort of neutral when it comes to allowing users, client users, be it local authorities, incorporate what's important for them in the local areas when they put these tenders out through the frameworks. Next slide, please. So when we put the frameworks together at the primary competition level, this was for contractors to get on, which is a large percentage of the audience today. They were tasked with providing evidence of how they would contribute to some of the policy drivers. And we used our own socially responsible procurement policy that we'd produced within Cardiff that really is a lens through which all Welsh Government legislation is viewed. And primes were asked to think about, in terms of method statements, how they would seek to provide and meet some of these requirements at secondary competition level. So we were looking at local training and employment, Think Wales First, and partners in communities. And the next slide will lead into some of the other areas that we were looking to test the primes in terms of being able to sign up and make commitments against our policy. So we had the green and sustainable, the ethical employment, and obviously the promotion of well-being of young people and vulnerable adults. And essentially we used a policy, a social value policy that all of the primes signed up to and signed up to a charter, and this was at framework award level, both across SEWSCAP and the civils framework. Thank you, Rosie. Next slide. So secondary competition then, this is where clients, so local authorities, universities, colleges and quasi-Welsh government bodies can call off across both the frameworks. And essentially it's events like these that would encourage decision makers to understand how the projects that they commission across South East Wales and the wider regions incorporate, the 7 wellbeing goals or the 5 ways of working, and how they're embedded into the employer's requirements, the specifications, and what the outcomes are for the wider projects. And then within frameworks as well, both frameworks have obviously KPIs as standard, and this obviously looks at things along cost predictability, time predictability, customer feedback, and then we do have embedded in percentages of local labour, local spend, a number of long-term unemployed, difficult to reach groups and apprenticeships that turn into employment jobs, along with environmental targets. And then similarly as well, there obviously is grant criteria coming across these projects. And for example, any Welsh government funded grant over 2 million would now seek to have project bank accounts, and these have been incorporated into the framework. And we've held a number of events with stakeholders to try and embed these across the projects that we do. Hand over to Penny now, because she'll do the bit about how the frameworks meet in the Act.
Thanks, Chris. So I'll be looking at how the frameworks meet in the Act. So the SEWSCAP framework is a member of the National Association of Construction Frameworks. This allows us to share best practice with counterparts of other regional frameworks. We're the first framework to become a member of the Supply Chain Sustainability School, which provides access to online content and sessions such as this today. We've had a number of sessions to upskill both our clients and contractor base. These include NEC accredited project manager training, and we also held a session on project bank accounts with Professor Rudy Klein speaking at the event, along with our clients and contractors sharing their positive experiences on utilising PBAs. We've also held a number of Meet the Contractor events, networking with Business Wales, Social Business Wales and CEW, one of which was a bit of a dating event to introduce and incorporate third sector into construction supply chains. From these events, the framework are working with a number of third sector organisations. Arts Factory have done a really good job in developing our website for both frameworks. Street Games are currently delivering a mental health programme to young individuals through doorstep sports clubs and their training academy, which I think is really important during these difficult times. School of Hard Knocks have completed an 8-week programme providing skills to hard-to-reach individuals. These individuals, along with a number of third sector organisations, are now being put forward within tender submissions procured by the framework. We've also been successful in receiving funding for a CITB on-site construction hub, which will be available for projects not only via the framework, but also in South East Wales. The CITB project will aim to deliver 750 unemployed individuals to become site ready, 750 college students provided with on-site work experience, 225 site-ready individuals gaining sustained employment, of which 65 of those will be from underrepresented groups. The framework, in collaboration with ISG, are also currently developing a career path app, which will be available for individuals to assist them in finding their ways into the construction industry. This will be available to both schools and colleges. Go to the next slide, please. So through the frameworks, there's been £1.1 billion spent through the 2 previous iterations. The framework has achieved a 9 out of 10 satisfaction rating, showing a delivery of a great learning environment. 88% of spend has been with SMEs, so works around about 968 million, along with 88% of spend with businesses in Wales, totaling to approximately 924 million. We've also achieved a 97% waste diverted from landfill, and projects via SEWSCAP 2 alone have employed 197 disadvantaged individuals and 23,000 training weeks. So SEWSCAP 2 included a CITB contractor-led skills academy led by Morgan Sindel, who delivered the key KPIs on the screen. So just to go through a few, the jobs created, it was 76 were planned and 114 were achieved. And then wage training weeks, 2,078 were planned and 3,563 were achieved. Have the next slide, please. A few others then is qualifications of subcontractors, 37 were planned and 81 were achieved. And then short course main contractors, 56 were planned and 166 were achieved. This achieved an overall 99% achievement, which is excellent. Okay, the next slide, please. So for the highways framework, we've included a social value levy, which is mandatory on the lower lots 1 to 6, and then 7 to 11 is optional if the client has specific social value commitments. Reason being is that on sort of the lower lots with the type of work undertaken, it might not be able to undertake social value elements. But when you look at it of a cumulative, that there'd be quite a bit of a missed opportunity. So when we've introduced the levy, through this levy, we've delivered NEC accredited project managers training and sustainable urban drainage training led by SUDS Champion and Atkins. We've also held a clocks webinar, and now we're looking to take this forward on a regional level. The framework has also supported a number of third sector organisations such as Street Games and School Hard Knocks, as previously mentioned, but also Groundworks Wales. We've supported them in providing continued access to transportation during COVID-19, and they're also currently delivering a project in RCT for hard to reach individuals. The framework is also networking with the NACF and SECA, working alongside these organisations, sharing best practice and receiving feedback from the industry. Through networking with apprenticeship providers, we've also been able to link up to our contractors and their supply chain. Next slide, please. And then there are contact details if anyone wishes to get into contact with us. Thanks.
Fantastic, thank you very much. That was a very short presentation of obviously a massive amount of work that goes on. So we're now very honoured to have Sophie Howe, the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, to give us a keynote speech. So thank you very much. Welcome, Sophie, and over to you.
Thank you, and bore da pawb. Let me just see if I can share my screen with you. Okay. Hopefully you're all seeing this now. Yeah, anyone?
Yeah, we can see a screen and some PowerPoint slides, but they're not up on full screen.
Okay, they should be up on. They should just be coming up on full screen now. So, thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. Some really interesting insights there in terms of what SEWSCAP has already achieved in relation to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and you know, I'm hoping that obviously many of you will be working quite closely with the Act and detail what it requires, but you know, quite simply, it requires us to take decisions in a way which meets today's needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And then it sets out those 7 wellbeing goals, which I suppose are our markers by which we achieve that, and then 5 ways of working. So planning for the long term, preventing problems from occurring, integrating our thinking, collaborating and working with others, and involving citizens. And if we do all of those things, if we apply those ways of working in the way that we go about all of our business, then we have a very good chance of achieving those wellbeing goals. What I would say, however, is don't underestimate how difficult this is. And, you know, when we talk about well-being, and it's become quite a kind of prolific topic in public policy terms internationally, you often see the New Zealand government and Jacinda Ardern as the sort of poster child of well-being, economics and so on. But what we're actually doing here in Wales is way above what any other country is requiring. So a completely holistic and a long-term approach to embedding wellbeing in everything that we do across government and across all of our main other public institutions. And when the legislation was passed, the minister who took it through called it the Common Sense Act, because in lots of ways it is common sense. And if we think that perhaps, you know, a conversation with our grandchildren, or perhaps by the time we we age, might be in that category of people who are living to 100, so could even be our great grandchildren, if we explain to them that you know, what we used to do was we used to pay people through our taxes to pay a substantial amount of money to other people, to spend that money building buildings that have been sourced by paying poor people a pittance, which will need us to dig up coal and damage the landscapes in doing that to power them. And then those buildings would lose a lot of that energy through the waste heat anyway, and people would go to war for that stuff in the ground because everyone wanted it so much. But when you burnt it, you killed more people through pollution and climate change than any of those wars put together. I think on any level, that doesn't sound like a sensible position at all. And I think, you know, often the ways that we've worked up until now, up until the point where we really are trying to make some substantial change, I think we do have a lot of explaining to do to our grandchildren and great-grandchildren and those generations to come. So my job obviously is to oversee the implementation of the Future Generations Act. As I said, it is hard, it is difficult. It's why we're getting such a lot of international attention. Last week, we just on the weekend, Wales actually shared a platform with both Chris Hemsworth of Thor fame and, believe it or not, the Pope, which gives you some sort of scale of how much interest there is in what we're doing here in Wales. But the stuff that sort of trickles down, that quote that we saw earlier, it's action more than words. The stuff that you're doing on every level through SEWSCAP and through your individual procurement decisions are the stuff that will make this real, will be action more than words or not. So more recently, I've published a Future Generations report, and that report, if my computer would start working, here we go. So that report is a requirement of every commissioner to publish a report on an assessment of progress that's been made to date and recommendations of things that we should be doing to improve implementation of the Act going forward. So you'll see here this sort of visual. This is our vision of the Wales that we want in 2050.
Sophie, we still can't see your slides. I think maybe you might be sharing a screen rather than sharing desktop. All we can see is an introductory slide.
Oh, right.
You might want to stop sharing and start again and share desktop.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. Sorry about the don't even let me stop now. Oh, dear. Sorry, everyone. And show. I tell you what, it might be just simpler to do it like this. Can you see that now? The it should be an image of
Yes, we can see that. It's not
okay.
all that clear because you've got like the document recovery at the side of the screen.
Yeah, let me see if I can close that down. For some reason, it's not showing when I put it onto slideshow.
Okay.
So if you're able to do it like this, is probably...
We can see that. I think we can manage with that. Yeah, thank you.
There we go. Okay, so this is a vision of the Wales that we want in 2050. This is an interactive version. If you go on to Future Generations Report 2020 online, it will take you to this interactive version, and you can see here that there's all manner of things. We've got offshore wind turbines. We've got around here health and wellness centres. We've got disabled rugby here. We've got integrated transport system powered by electric, with electric vehicle charging points. We've got a circular economy site down here in the bottom, and so on. So do have a look at that. There is a specific chapter in that report on procurement and how well we're doing at the moment in terms of procurement. I'm going to be saying a little bit more about that in a moment. But I suppose the key and kind of overarching finding from the report is that every public body is doing something differently in response to the Act. We're not all approaching it in the same way, but certainly the Act is driving innovation in a number of areas, and we're seeing that filter through both from sort of individual programmes, innovative approaches, right through to things like embedding it in frameworks and so on. We have not yet completely nailed it, but we are on our way. What I've also found is that there's been a marked change in political commitment to the Act and in resulting policy decisions. There is, however, some lag in the system. So in a moment, I'll talk about some of the most significant Welsh Government policy decisions. But certainly in the last 2 years, there's been a really marked change in the language of government reinforcing the requirements of the Act. Their spending decisions reinforcing that, and the kind of focus from government on what public bodies out there are doing to implement the Act. This is sort of, so there are 44 public bodies covered by the legislation, and this is kind of broadly where we assess them to be. This is how they're going about implementing the Act. So in this top left-hand corner, the planners. These are organisations that are focused on getting their corporate plans aligned to their wellbeing objectives and focused a lot on the process. However, they possibly haven't focused on the cultural change. And again, I think, I'm highlighting this in particular because I think that there's a risk sometimes through frameworks that we focus too much on the process. Have you got an X, Y, or Z policy, for example, and therefore, happy days, you've written the policy and there you go, you qualify, and less on, so what are the actual outcomes of that? And we have to really focus on delivering those outcomes which are set out in those wellbeing goals, but also delivering the outcomes that individual public bodies have set out through their own wellbeing objectives. I suppose the opposite to that is that bottom right-hand corner, the lone innovators. So these are organisations which have encouraged innovation or given permission to innovate, but have not necessarily aligned that innovation with what they're trying to achieve corporately. So we've got some brilliant pieces of work taking place, connected back perhaps to meeting the goals in the Act, but not necessarily connected to those corporate wellbeing objectives set by the public body that they're operating within. The bottom left-hand corner, the overwhelmed or the overconfident, these are people who are either sort of overwhelmed, they're being pulled in all manner of different directions. Sometimes we find our procurement departments in particular are overwhelmed because of some of the complex landscapes that operate out there, because of the challenge with reducing resources and so on. But then we have the overconfident, and I think some of that, just saying that I've got the policy in place, my work here is done, that fits into the overconfident box. So we really need to guard against that. Where we need to be is that top right-hand corner, the believers and the achievers. Those are organisations who have invested both in getting their corporate centres, their plans, their wellbeing objectives aligned and their processes beneath, but also who encourage that innovation, who allow people to go out and have sensible conversations with partners, who allow them to trial new things and take forward innovative examples of projects and so on. So we need both the cultural change and the corporate objectives aligned in that way if we're going to get to this believers and achievers category. So just talking about some of the innovation, my office has collected hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of case studies. I think our case studies, just a paragraph each, are amounting to, they're growing every day, but that we're on about 106 pages of case studies at the moment of innovation that is being driven by the Act. There's some here, the Powys Pound, where there's a real focus on the foundational economy there and increased spend in local businesses. The Carbon Positive project in Natural Resources Wales, where they looked right across their operation in terms of where they were making the biggest contribution in terms of carbon emissions and looked to reduce those. In Carmarthenshire, 2 new primary schools have been built to passive house standards. That begs the question, if it can be done in Carmarthen, why can't it be done everywhere? A load of other things there. As I said, I could sort of I could go on and on. We're also seeing some better partnership working between our public bodies. This is still challenging in some areas, particularly, again, because of this complex landscape, not everyone operating on the same boundaries and so on. But some really interesting work that's been going on in Neath Port Talbot Public Service Board on addressing drug deaths through county lines. The Gwent housing associations and local authorities coming together to focus on the foundational economy, which indeed will be very relevant to the work that you're doing. The National Museums work beyond their boundaries, really by focusing on providing apprenticeships to those furthest from the labour market. Swansea Health Board has developed a partnership with the National Botanic Gardens, recognising to make contributions to enhancing and maintaining nature and what they can do with that on their sites. So the point that I'm making here really is that many public bodies are working beyond their traditional boundaries, and that is something that we want to see across the board. So we should be, you know, if we're building a school, we should not be just thinking about the kind of educational provision in that school and how that building is going to meet that, but also how is that building going to enhance and maintain nature? How is it going to help us reduce our carbon emissions targets? How is it going to help us to skill up local people and provide local jobs? Whether the materials that we're using within that are procured and sourced in a globally responsible way, and so on. So specific big policy areas where there's been some real change in terms of the Welsh Government approach. So Planning Policy Wales and the National Development Framework, again, very much aligned with the Future Generations Act. Planning policy in particular, big focus on placemaking, and indeed with COVID, I think that is ramping up the agenda even further. So the aspiration from government around 30% home working, the focus that I've talked about in terms of the foundational economy, investment that's now going in terms of town centre regeneration, and the likelihood that the kind of hyper-local will become even more relevant in the future as more and more of us continue to work from home, and that becomes our new normal. So there's certainly something for us to be thinking about there in terms of how we're spending money and how we're supporting that local economy and how we're supporting the making of good places. One of the things that I've recommended, for example, is 20-minute neighbourhoods, where you should be able to access the services that you need for, you know, for life, for work, public services and so on within a 20-minute cycle or walk of your home. And again, that's an approach which is being embraced in other parts of the world. The Mayor of Paris has just committed to 15-minute neighbourhoods, a bit easier in a city like Paris, but something for us to be thinking about there. National Transport Strategy. Again, I suppose thinking about procurement. When should we be thinking about not building things, because that better aligns with the wellbeing objectives that we're trying to achieve? And again, you know, for the last number of years, I've been saying to government that there is this trend in increased home working. It is a trend probably that we want to escalate. Obviously, nobody planned a global pandemic to increase probably about 6 years worth of escalation in home working in about 6 weeks. But nevertheless, what we are now seeing is a national transport strategy draft, you know, in development, which will be focusing on, you know, let's reduce the need for transportation in the first instance, and then the hierarchy follows in terms of active travel and, you know, cycling and walking routes, then public transport, then electric vehicles, and right at the bottom of that hierarchy should be traditional type investment in roads. We've seen increased spending on the climate emergency. I've talked about the foundational economy and the economic contract coming from government, but also this new approach in terms of social partnership. So putting in law a social partnership between business, government, trade unions and others, and throughout the COVID pandemic, the First Minister has brought this Social Partnership Council together to help him take decisions and to work with colleagues around the approach to the pandemic, which I think is why we've seen some of the much better results in Wales, particularly, for example, in terms of test, track and trace, and that collaborative approach where you bring all people together is really bearing fruit there. So in the last year or so, I've been doing some specific work on procurement. I had intended to use what I call my Section 20 review powers. So this is powers that are given to me in the Act to review the approach that public bodies are taking in terms of implementation of the Act, and I'd intended to do that in relation to procurement. I triggered that review just before the pandemic hit. So, you know, in recognition of the immense pressure on public bodies, have kind of paused that and have undertaken more of a desk-based research and review approach. And some of the things that we found have been really interesting, some of them not particularly surprising. We have seen some really good examples of how public bodies are procuring in line with the Future Generations Act. And we talk about that procurement, or we talk about the approach for the Future Generations Act being about both what you do and then how you decide to do it. So both of those things are equally important. So you've decided that you're going to build a school because you've got an objective, you know, to give every child the best start in life. And you know, your schools are in need of repair and so on and so on, and that's fine. Building a school would obviously help you to meet that objective, but how you go about building that school is also critically important in terms of whether you're going to meet those broader objectives that you have set. So some examples here then. So Carmarthenshire Council, here are some of their wellbeing objectives. So help give every child the best start in life, help children live healthy lifestyles. I won't read them. I won't read them all out. You can see them on the screen there. So how then did they go about their procurement in terms of meeting those outcomes? So they built a new school. They commissioned that with a requirement to achieve Passive House Certificate and BREEAM Excellence. They have showed us how they've considered the long-term preventative impact of the ways that they've gone about doing that. And they've demonstrated how that project met 10, just to go back to this, met 10 out of their wellbeing objectives. So this is really the sort of model that we're wanting to see through every procurement approach. And whilst the frameworks are really important because they give, as you've just heard earlier, they give that kind of overarching approach to guiding us towards meeting the wellbeing goals. At a local level, the specific legal duties on those people taking decisions in our public bodies is to take all reasonable steps to meet their wellbeing objectives. So if you've set wellbeing objectives like this, the way in which you go about spending public money through procurement would be considered to be a reasonable step. And if you're not taking that reasonable step, therefore, to align your procurement to doing everything that you can to meet these wellbeing objectives, you wouldn't be meeting your legal duties. So it really is about applying a systematic test, if you like, yes, through the frameworks, but also locally back to your individual public body wellbeing objectives. Another example here then, the National Library for Wales. These are some of their wellbeing objectives: making a difference to Wales, being excellent custodians of the collections, long-term access to national collections, being central to national cultural life and ensuring resilience for the long term. And some of the interesting approaches that they've taken is that they actually cancelled the procurement of the construction of a storage facility as part of their National Broadcasting Archive, because it would have had a negative environmental impact. So really interesting approach there of how they're thinking about how they spend the money they have in line with their wellbeing objectives. So the money there is being redirected towards a project investing in community engagement with culture and heritage, because that is a reasonable step, a reasonable decision for them to take in terms of meeting their wellbeing objectives. So this is really the kind of forensic approach that needs to be taken by our public bodies and needs to be considered by those who are working with them. Another example then, Caerphilly County Borough Council. This was an example back in 2018, I think it was, might have been 2017. So these were their wellbeing objectives at the time. They've changed slightly since. So they've actually done reasonably well in terms of meeting those outcomes through the Welsh Housing Quality Standard programme. So we can see there the provision of training and apprenticeships. They've taken forward that Welsh Housing Quality Standard programme in a way which also focuses on improving local green space and community areas, and they've involved communities to understand their priorities. So some good things there, but I think there's also something for us to consider in how far can you go? What is the art of the possible? So if their objective is to reduce their carbon footprint, they could have gone further by taking a whole life approach to costing. They could have considered sources for renewable energies. They could have gone beyond existing frameworks, which set out the kind of community benefits. They could have considered, as they were, cleaning and greening those communities, active travel, local cycle paths, and so on. So again, it's this real deep look at what is the art of the possible. What more could we do to meet those wellbeing objectives that we've set? So those are some of the positives, but as you will know as well as I, there are a number of barriers to progress. So a lot of this will not surprise you. It doesn't surprise me. People have been saying this for a long time, but the initial findings from the first phase of my procurement review shows that leadership, involvement, engagement, resources and capacity alongside complex landscape are challenges for procuring sustainably. So there does appear to be, certainly at a national level, and that is filtering down to the local level, a renewed political commitment towards ensuring procurement is that kind of lever to drive wider change. But there has been a lot of there's been a lot of flux within that policy area over the last few years. The demise of the National Procurement Service, renewal of frameworks, the emergence of new policy agendas such as the foundational economy and so on. And there's a real challenge there to ensure that the government is not just making an already complex landscape even more complex. We have internationally groundbreaking legislation in place. That's got to be the starting point in terms of our procurement decisions. So layering on more policy objectives is not helpful. We're working with the government at the moment on a national procurement strategy and how we try to unpick some of the complexities around that. Our research and review has found that although procurement processes have improved, there is still too much focus on process and not on outcomes. So again, I go back to some of the things that are in the SEWSCAP. A lot of focus on, do you have this policy? Do you have that policy? Do you have the other policy? Just because you have a policy in place, it doesn't mean anyone's going to do anything about it unless the cultural change has been embedded in your organisation and unless there's a clear sense of leadership within contractors and within the public bodies doing the contracting and a big focus on outcomes. Measuring community benefits has been in place for many years, but the reporting impact of this is not widely shared. I think that there's a huge kind of challenge in doing that, but it's something that we really need to nail. We need to move beyond community benefits as they're described to delivering well-being as defined in law. So gone are the days where a community benefit might be seen as sort of painting the local school fence or something along those lines. As defined in law now, we have this obligation to deliver, to take all reasonable steps to deliver against local wellbeing objectives. So we need to be seeing how your spend is delivering against those wellbeing objectives, not just doing random things which might appear to be quite nice. We're still seeing too much focus on short-term cost versus delivering wider outcomes. And this is where sort of integration and collaboration becomes really important. Because when we think about, if we think about our wellbeing objectives and goals holistically, it leads us to do different things, if you like. So back to that example of building a school. Yes, we can build a school with bricks and mortar, which children can be educated in, if our sole objective is to do that. But when we look at our wider objectives around environmental sustainability, around the connections of how do you, through the way in which we build, think about that environmental sustainability and also learning, how can we engage children and so on in developing some of that with us to actually develop some of those learning outcomes as well as environmental sustainability? How are we thinking about the whole project? So we're perhaps not just building a school, but how are people going to get to that school? If we're still in a position where we've built a passive house school, but everyone's driving to get there, we're kind of defeating the whole object. So how do we think collaboratively across the whole way in which these things will operate? I mentioned opportunities for sharing and learning appear to be limited at the moment. That's why sessions such as this are so useful. We need to better support innovation and learning from that innovation. Procurement is sometimes treated as a transactional process, and therefore transformational opportunities are not being maximised. That's if we just go through the process, if we just tick the boxes, we will be completely missing the point. So we need to be having those conversations, those broader conversations between the public sector and between the private sector, where the public sector say, these are the broad outcomes that we're looking to achieve. What can you bring to us that will help us to achieve those broad outcomes? And yes, there will be some sort of horse trading within that. Yes, there are some difficult decisions that might have to be taken, but actually the requirement on those public bodies is, as I said, to be looking at things in a holistic manner. And then we are seeing that there are what we describe as future generations champions. I put there, these are sometimes frustrated champions within our public bodies who are working to deliver positive procurement outcomes, but often without wider organisational or leadership support. And I don't underestimate the challenge of procurement professionals seen as one of those kind of back office functions where cuts have been made during austerity, and now perhaps we are paying the price because we are perhaps not spending our money as wisely as we could be. So the recommendations there and opportunities for change. So we need to develop leadership that supports a strategic approach to procurement and really recognise that power of procurement. Professor Kevin Morgan talks about procurement being a boardroom function, not a backroom function, and I think that's exactly it. My review was really trying to focus on leaders and chief executives of our public bodies, asking them, actually, well, how have you driven that? Because if you're not using the power of procurement to drive progress against your wellbeing objectives, then as an accounting officer, you're not spending public money wisely and you're not meeting your legal requirements. So if they're not creating the environment and putting in place the resources to do that, that is a significant problem. So talking about wellbeing, procuring with a focus on outcomes and measuring what matters, focusing on the longer term financial planning. Some of the big ticket items I've been challenging government on, for example, is we're already seeing some significant additional investment in housing retrofit, as part of the kind of COVID reconstruction strategy. That's brilliant. It's a kind of no-brainer. It delivers on a huge number of outcomes. But if we're just putting small amounts of 9 million quid in here and there without setting out that long-term plan of how we're going to fund that, how we develop the supply chain to do that, how we develop the skills pathway to meet that, and not just meet that in a narrow way, but actually target those furthest from the labour market, those people who are from BAME communities, disabled people and so on, then we will be missing a substantial number of opportunities. And we can only really do that properly when we've got that kind of long-term trajectory in terms of funding. Promote effective collaboration with each other and suppliers to improve sharing, learning capacity and skills. As I said, this conversation and this dialogue between suppliers and those who are procuring are absolutely crucial. And there's some interesting work going on with the support of CLES who work in the foundational economy with a number of public service boards to do that work mapping who is out there locally in your supply chain, and what is the spend of the public institutions in the area doing, and is it focusing on that local supply chain and helping to develop capacity and skills and so on. And then promote a can-do mindset and attitude. As I said, think about the art of the possible across all of your wellbeing objectives, and then build on established frameworks, including legal. There's possibly something around a kind of a cull of frameworks and perhaps better sort of alignment, if you like, making sure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but making sure that if you're trying to navigate this stuff, that it's actually as simple as it can be. I know nothing is ever simple in this world, but the mass number of different toolkits, frameworks, policy frameworks, and so on don't help. And there, approach all the procurement decisions through the lens of the Act. So we want to see how you're applying the 5 ways of working and how you're taking all reasonable steps to meet your wellbeing objectives and provide clear evidence of that. So that's the recommendations that we've reached so far. We are continuing the dialogue with 9 public bodies who are subject to my procurement review at the moment, and there's likely to be more learning then from those, which we can share as soon as we have it. Thank you.
Sophie, thank you very much for a wonderful and inspirational presentation. Firstly, a quick question for you. Do you have any objection if we share the slide deck that you've just shared with us? Brilliant. If you could send that over to the team, that would be fantastic, and we'll send it through. And a massive challenge for procurement, which as a procurement professional myself, I'm delighted to see, and we're certainly here to help in the supply chain school to do everything we can. So, Sophie, thank you very much for that presentation. It's much appreciated, and I'm sure our audience appreciated it too. Okay, so we're going to move on now to a series of short presentations to understand how various school partners are aligning with the Act and how they're responding to some of the challenges that Sophie put out there. So I'm going to ask each speaker in turn just to hand over from one to the other, so you won't be hearing from me in the interim period, in the interest of time. We are overrunning a little bit, but we've got a little bit of time at the end, so we can cover your questions and your thoughts at the end. So if I can hand over first then to Jane to hand over to the subsequent speakers as we go through the case study presentations. Thank you.
I will do. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about what we've been doing in the Vale of Glamorgan with our partners. As Sophie said, as a public body, the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act is at the heart of everything that we do, and all the decisions that we make are based around the Act. And what we've been doing is we've been working with the Commissioner's Office, with Constructing Excellence Wales, and with CLAW to look at how we can come up with a project directory that shows how our projects are delivering against the Act. And that's just being able to provide an evidence base that projects can use then. So it bases on the REBA stages so that you can consider at every stage. So in procurement is an important stage of that, but a lot of these considerations we need to be making against the Act prior to the procurement decision. So that work is continuing, and over the next few weeks you'll be hearing more from us on that, on how we're going to take this directory forward to help project teams deliver against the Act. Just a quick bit here about the 21st Century Schools programme. They're the projects that we're going to be talking about today. That's a great platform to be able to deliver against. It's co-constructed with Welsh Government and with all of the authorities. It's a 20-year programme split into bands. Under Band A, we delivered 8 schools, which ran up to 2019. We're now into Band B, And we're looking to deliver £167 million worth of new schools across the Vale as part of Band B. And everything we do is looking at those 7 objectives and against the 5 ways of working. Next slide, please. These are the projects that form part of our Band B and the pipeline going forward. Pipeline is really, really important, and we get that as a client, that pipeline is really important to our contractors and to that wider supply chain, because without that it's really hard for you to plan. So these are the projects that we've currently got on site. I'll just go very quickly through some of them and then about how we're delivering differently against these projects. Next slide, please. Brief bit about the Barry Secondary Learning Communities. This is where we're doing something differently. So we've got 3 new secondary schools, all refurbished, all within a mile of each other, all on site at the same time. So what was really important here is that we didn't just have 3 different contractors delivering against their set of objectives through the KPIs from SEWSCAP and also the KPIs that we set as a project, but we needed to do it differently. And what we've come up with is a collaborative way of working with all of the contractors coming together. So although they've got individual targets for community benefits and social value, what we're doing is delivering those as a whole, so delivering those differently. So we've got Bro Morgannwg, which is a £21.5 million project that's being delivered by ISG. Pencoitra, that's a £34.7 million project being delivered by and we've got Whitmore High School, which is a £30.5 million project that is being delivered by Morgan Sindall. And I think what's really important for us in the Vale is that these buildings are more than just schools. They are regeneration projects that are transforming communities, and that's what's really important to us in the Vale. It's always been more than just about ticking boxes, and that's something we definitely don't want to do, and that's something that, you know, with our partners, our contractors here, that's something we're definitely not just doing. Next slide, please. The next phase on for me is our primaries. So we've got 3 primaries in the Western Vale, and as Sophie said, we need to challenge ourselves to think differently, and that's certainly what we've done with these projects here. So St David's is a low carbon solution, and St Nicholas and Llancarvan are going to be net zero carbon buildings. So these will be some of the first ones in Wales that are delivered that will have operational net zero carbon. Llancarvan starts on site later this month, and St Nicholas then later in November with a 12-month build period. Next slide, please. Why do we have community benefits, social value, whatever we want to call them? To us, they're really important. As we said, this isn't just about the building, it's about what we can do through that building. So how can we affect, you know, the social, environmental and economic background of those? So it's about supporting those local businesses. It's really important that we use these as training and upskilling. It's about the STEM engagement, so schools are involved in the process all the way through. They even form part of the procurement process with us. And then it's about how can we help that wider community. And as Sophie said, this isn't just about painting a fence for somebody. We're trying to take a more holistic view of that and look across our contractors at how we can work better with third sector organisations and with that wider community. So there are targets that are set by SEWSCAP, there are targets that are set by Welsh Government, but we want to go beyond those in the Vale. But as I said, this isn't just about ticking a box, it's about being able to do something differently. Next slide, please. And the way that we've done that is with this collaborative approach. So we've got all the contractors, we've got our consultants, we hold regular monthly meetings with the contractors to look at how we're delivering against the targets that we've got. We've held joint events, so whether they're Meet the Buyer, whether they're apprenticeship days, and my partner contractors will talk a bit more about that. We've implemented a standard work experience programme, so any pupil that's coming on to one of our projects, regardless of the contractor or the consultant, is having that same experience across the board. Healthy competition is great across the contractors, because that helps drive innovation and doing things differently. So we never like to stand on our laurels. We also hold a quarterly steering group workshop, which has got wider partners. So that has got my cabinet member for education and regeneration sitting on it. It's got our third sector partners. It's got housing sitting on that. It's got health sitting on that. So looking at how we can cut across some of those boundaries and deliver really for our community. Next slide, please. This for me sort of sums it up, so I won't read it out, but the important bit from this is that it has to happen early. You need to be thinking about what you want to deliver at those concept stages. So this is before we've started the procurement, because you need to be able to set out in your procurement what you as a local authority and as that project clearly want to deliver on. So that's the really key point that I would say, that it needs to be thought about early, and make sure at that point you're looking at what your objectives are that you want to deliver against those wellbeing objectives that each authority has. Next slide, please. These are just some of the achievements that we've had in Bambi to date. So it is about keeping that spend in Wales. It is about training people in Wales. It's about upskilling people in Wales. It's about talking to schools to show them what a fantastic industry we're in, to try and get people involved with it. It's also about linking then about how those pupils are involved in the process along the way, how we're looking at the impact that that building has on the ecology and the environment that we're going to leave at the end of that building as well. Next slide, please. These are just some of the community initiatives that collectively we've delivered. We've done the beach cleans, and one of the exciting things on that slide is that white cabin that you can see there. So Scoladerry is our special school in the Vale. You've perhaps seen it on the BBC. There's been a TV series on it, but they've set up a social enterprise business called Box Boyd, and what they're doing is providing site canteen facilities for Whitmore High School, and then we'll be moving on to the scheme at Pencoitra, and then off-site for Ysgol Bro Morgannwg. And what that's doing is giving those pupils real first-hand training experiences in that kitchen, serving out to the workforce of the sites. A great experience for them. They get that training, and then those pupils will have the opportunity to have real jobs with our Big Fresh catering company, which is the Vales catering company that works in the school. So this is a stepping stone for them. So that's something that we're really proud of, and it is about doing things differently there. We've got our school ambassadors, our community ambassadors, and our community donation. So again, it's just about doing things differently. And if I hand over now, if we go over to the next slide, the contractors will go through some of the things that they've been doing. So if I hand over to Harriet Wade of ISG to talk about the supply chain.
Thanks, Jane. Hello, everyone. So just to put in perspective on what Jane's talked about, each contractor is going to talk about one single area. So for ISG, we've chosen the local supply chain and how collaboratively we've worked together between the three contractors in the Vale of Glamorgan to look at our supply chain. So not only just holding events ourselves, we've collaboratively worked together to hold a Meet the Buyer event between the three contractors, offering our supply chain to come along to talk to all three contractors and to also get more of our local businesses to come in and talk to us. And that then gives us an opportunity to talk to them to see how we can upskill them to then come onto our supply chain. In these events, it was great to be able to meet different suppliers that we've never really engaged with before, and to then put in process how we can upskill them and support them into what needs to be done to get onto each contractor's supply chain. So from that event, we've worked with Sparkle Cleaning contractor. So Sparkle Cleaning have done all our cleaning on Bro Morgannwg. They originally started just doing our office setup. And then as time progressed, we upskilled them to then be able to do our builders clean on site. So unlike the other two projects, we are doing a refurbishment project, so which meaning we go in different phases of handing our building over. So in the first phase, we needed to ensure that the building was clean, ready for the September handover for the students to come back to the school. So this was a great opportunity for us to upskill our local suppliers, which are based down in Barry Waterfront by Asda. So a very local business to the project, offering them, experience in how to get onto our supply chain. So we engage with 8 people through the supply chain, which are now upskilled with CSES cards and all of the special things that they may need to do the cleaning on site. So some of our supply chain support and information sharing. So between the 3 contractors, we have what's called a Welsh spend tracker. And so this Welsh spend tracker, basically it calculates every job on site and what we're doing to deliver our supply chain in Wales. So as Jane mentioned, we have 80% spend in Wales, 76% of that is based supply chain is based in Wales, which means then from that we're getting more local people onto the project. So we have 50% of people coming to our jobs that are within the CF postcode, which is absolutely fantastic. And then moving forward, we have a project bank account. So out of the 4 schemes, Whitmore, Pencoitra and the Western Vale projects are all on this project bank account, which means they're overarching, can be looked between the 3 projects. Can I just forward to the next slide, and Mike Little from Morgan Sindall is going to talk a little bit more to you.
Thanks, Harriet. Morning, everybody. I'm Mike Little. I'm the Community Engagement Manager with Morgan Sindall. We've chosen to talk about these different areas. That's not to say that these are the only areas that us as a company are dealing with. We're all working collaboratively. And so everything that Harriet's just talked about, that's something that as a group of contractors, that's what we're delivering on this project. And it's exactly the same with this example, employment and skills that we're talking about here. We're working really closely with Job Centre Plus in Barry, with Communities for Work, Inspire to Work, to make sure that local people looking for work experience, looking to upskill themselves, looking to get into employment opportunities, have that chance on our projects. So we're able to bring people on. We're giving local people some site tours just so they can get a real overview of what a working construction site looks like. And then we've been able to deliver work experience opportunities, even through this very bizarre situation that we find ourselves in the middle of a pandemic, because our sites are set up so safely in line with all of the COVID restrictions and requirements there. We're still able to bring people on and provide those work experience opportunities, which we feel is so important, especially in this time at the moment. So we've got some examples there of that. The Career Changes Programme was something that was developed with CITB. It was a commissioned funding programme, and the aim of it was to allow women who wanted to change a career to think about a career in construction. So again, we've all taken somebody on locally to take them through an apprenticeship. So what we had on our project, we had Anne-Marie, who was working in the care sector, looking to upskill and change careers. She came to us and she's done a plant apprenticeship, and she trained for a year on our project with our ground workers, learning how to drive machinery and lots of other skills that she didn't have before. And she's actually moved now over onto the Bouygues project in Coitra High School. So it's a really good example of how we're working together, we're talking closely, and where there's opportunity to enhance and extend that opportunity for people to develop themselves on other projects, we're able to move those around as well. Number of careers events that we've attended, again, jointly, you can see right-hand picture there with there's ourselves, there's Bouygues, there's ISG, and also Apprentice, the shared apprenticeship company that we work very closely with. Great events, really important to speak to young people about what the opportunities are within the construction industry. Again, we all know quite often when it comes to education and schools, construction is kind of almost a dirty word. And so we want to change that. We want to really kind of encourage young people to consider this industry as a great route into a fantastic career. And one of the other things that we delivered as part of that career changes program actually was unconscious bias training. And again, members of all of the different project teams came for that, went through that unconscious bias training. Again, quite an eye-opener for quite a lot of people that went on that. But again, it was another example of how we're working collaboratively. If there's opportunities that we're delivering on one project and that can continue on to another, we're talking quite closely to make sure that the benefits of our local community are being looked at rather than just how we deliver our targets. So I'll move on now. If we can go to the next slide, please, and then it's Alison Howe from Bouygues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Alison Howe. I'm the Social Value Advisor for Bouygues. So just to finish off with our section, we've also done some really positive things in terms of education within our schools and communities. So Jane touched on it earlier with the school ambassadors. So we launched just before the summer, actually, our school ambassador program. So we have a cohort of Pencoitra High School ambassadors. It was all done virtually. In the current climate, we normally would have done it face to face, but you can see there at the sort of top right hand side of the slide the collage of all of our student ambassadors. So they will be our link between the school and us on site. So we will offer them site visits, they'll come over, they'll have project updates, etc., and then they can go back and relay that information to their fellow students. And you know, they can be sort of that link and that bridge really between the project and their school. We also supported the hub schools during the COVID-19 sort of issues just before the summer and during the summer, where there were hub schools set up in the Vale, which were obviously offering activities for students that were there, primary and secondary. And we put together some packs of activities that those students could do so that the teachers would be able to sort of open those packs, give those activities to the students, and that kept them sort of having something to do which was educational, linked to the environment and sustainability as well. So we all got together and distributed those sort of over the spring and summer. We've formed some really great local partnerships as well. So you can see at the bottom there, we have the School of Hard Knocks logo and the Cardiff Blues Community Foundation. So we've all partnered with organisations to help us to really effectively deliver some great outcomes in the Vale, both in terms of school engagement and community engagement, really. So there's some really positive things happening with those partnerships and things going on in the Vale and in the schools. We've also engaged with our sort of cluster schools, so we're obviously working on high school projects, but the primary schools that sort of feed into those high schools, we've been working with those, hosting head teacher, deputy head teacher meetings and in site offices, allowing them to have a look around the school and working with them to establish how we can sort of work together going forward and get the students involved sort of from primary level, you know, in order to have sort of visits, updates, activities and so on. So we're doing some really good work there. And finally, we've all been putting together video tours of our sites. So again, we're not able to offer as many actual site visits as we would normally. So we've been putting together updates every few weeks of progress on site, distributing that then to our schools so that that can be shared on YouTube channels, websites, etc., so that they really can be kept in the loop of how things are developing. And that can also be a discussion point if they have any questions and they want to come to us and ask that through their schools. So we've been doing some really fantastic work in terms of education as well. Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks very much for those presentations. It really annoys me when people say the construction industry can't collaborate. You've only got to look at that series of presentations and go, wow, yes, of course we can. And we can achieve some amazing things. So you've kind of seen today the flow down from the government and the Driving the Future Generations Act into a client, and the way the client sets out their frameworks, and then how those framework contractors can work together to do more and more and more to actually drive the value. Okay, we're going to have a short break now. We are overrunning a little bit, so if I can declare a break of 5 minutes, please, just in time to go and get a bit of a comfort break maybe, and then we'll be back together again with some more examples. So thank you very much to our presenters so far. You've been brilliant. Thanks to the audience. We'll see you again in another 5 minutes. Thanks very much. Hello and welcome back, everybody. I hope you've most of you have returned from that very short break, but we're trying to get things back on track if we can. Rosie, are you there and can you share your screen?
Yeah, can you see it? You should be able to see it now.
No, I can just see I can just see your initials. I can't see your screen. Still can't see the screen, Rosie. Are you there, Rosie? Do we have a problem with the screen sharing?
Hi, Sean. It's Paul.
Hi, Paul.
Hello. Rosie's just been in touch with me. Her Teams crashed and she's just getting back onto it. So
Wow.
She'll be with you in 2 minutes.
Okay, thanks a lot, Paul.
Promise.
And do we have Claire Lane back on the call?
Yep, I'm here, Sean.
Okay, thanks, Claire. So you're ready to go when when we get the screen. Hi, welcome back, Rosie. Let's just catch up with the slides to Claire's presentation.
Hi, Sean. Sorry about that.
No worries. These things happen, Rosie. So welcome back, everybody. Those of you that took a couple of extra minutes having a cup of tea, haven't missed anything. Thanks to Rosie's Teams crashing. So we're going to hand over now to Claire to talk about street games and how they're contributing to this agenda. Over to you, Claire. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sean. Technical issues, hey, we all love them. Yes, so my name's Claire Lane. I am the head of programmes at Street Games in Wales. And Rosie, I seem to have lost your slides already.
Are you there, Rosie?
Sean, shall I share the slides from my end?
Yes, Claire, if you've got your slides, then let's do them from your end. Yeah, thank you.
Hold on with me just a second.
Yep, that's great. We can see. Oh, we could see your slides. They've gone again.
Okay.
Yep, we can see them now.
No, I'm having issues on my end.
Oh no.
It's okay. I'll start talking until Rosie comes back.
Okay. Yeah. We've got Rosie. Rosie's back now. Hi, Rosie.
Sorry, I don't know what is happening here. Right, fingers crossed it will work.
Don't worry. Let's go for it. Okay.
Fine. So hi everyone, so my name's Claire, I'm the head of programmes at Street Games in Wales, and I've been invited today from Chris, Penny and Kevin at Cardiff at SEWSCAP just to talk a little bit about the work that we do as a charity, but also the work that we're doing through the SEWSCAP framework. So I'm just going to start by giving you a little bit of a background to who we are as a charity and kind of what we're about, particularly during this period that we're in right now around this COVID pandemic and how it's impacting on communities across Wales. So we're a charity, we were set up about 11 or 12 years ago now, and our purpose is to enable disadvantaged young people and their communities to be healthier, safer and more successful. And we do this by using sport, physical activity and volunteering as a tool to to make change in areas living in deprivation. Next slide, please, Rosie. Hopefully. Brilliant. So we have our kind of 3 key pillars that are around healthier, safer and more successful. And I won't go through this because I know that we'll share the slides afterwards, but this really is about tackling inequality for children and young people living in areas of deprivation, areas of poverty. And although we're a UK-wide organisation, my role is particularly focusing on Wales and the communities in Wales that are in the top 20% of deprivation across the country. And we're looking at how do we tackle this inactivity problem, how do we close the gap between participation and non-participation, and then how do we use sport as a tool for a range of other things, so around community safety, around education, around volunteering and social action. Next slide, please. So before COVID, we knew that around 1 in 3 young people are living in poverty in Wales. And we already knew that by 2022, that was set to rise anyway. Now, what we're expecting and what the kind of stats and other organisations are also predicting is that this is going to rise, especially as we move on into mass unemployment and kind of problems with economy that we're all expecting. This is going to change. What we also know from previous research is that families living in poverty have on average as little as £3.21 per week to spend on leisure activities. Now, this is as a family, this isn't per person. So if you imagine a family of 4 or 5, however many, £3.21 won't even get you a swim at a leisure centre, let alone joining a club or taking part in any kind of competitive sport. So part of what we exist for is to make community offers accessible, most of the time free of charge, so that young people can access all of the benefits of sport and physical activity, but without the price tag. Next slide, please. And the way that we do this is by a network of partners across the country to help provide these opportunities within communities. Now, we show this graph whenever patient because this is about the opportunities available to young people, to communities, to individuals to take part in sport and physical activity. Now, whilst these numbers are rough, all of the data that we've got support these numbers and this kind of proportion of difference across affluent areas and least affluent areas. So if you're a young person living in one of the most affluent areas in the UK, you are 20% more likely to be able to access some kind of sport and physical activity. Now, that could be a club, that could be a facility, that could be an offer at an after-school club. Now, if you live in one of the least affluent areas and you're in a minority group, that changes again. So you're doubly less likely, if that makes sense. So we call that the double jeopardy, just around how you just can't access things. There aren't facilities in your community. There aren't clubs going on. There aren't sessions for you to attend that your family can afford. You don't have the transport to get there. You don't have the right pair of trainers to enable you to take part. And we see this as a deficit gap. And that is what we're seeking to fill. So the blue bars on the graph there just demonstrate how we work with a network of a whole range of different partners, and some of which are on this call today, to try and create those opportunities locally. Next slide, please, Rosie. So this map here just gives you a little bit of a sense of our reach across the whole of Wales. And this is what we call locally trusted organisations. So these are organisations that are delivering sport and physical activity on the front line in communities. So they're not necessarily a traditional sports club. They're probably a local charity, a local community organisation, or an individual that set themselves up as a company to help these young people and to help these communities. Now, what each of the pins represent is an organisation, and many of them deliver across multiple locations. So why am I showing you this map? Why does this matter? This is just to demonstrate to you the reach that we've got across Wales. Into communities that you are all probably already working in, next to, within, around, and the engagement opportunities which we can create to provide you with new and different audiences, particularly young people, their families and community leaders. We can help you to have a positive impact locally and hyper locally, as Sophie referred to earlier, just around how your projects that you've already got going on, how do you kind of impact more widely than just the building that we've heard lots about already this morning. Next slide, please. You still there, Rosie? Thank you. So what do we actually do then? So we have a whole range of different programmes and interventions across Wales in a whole range of different places, as I've said. And these are targeted, insight-led approaches that are tried and tested, that deliver value, deliver outcomes, deliver kind of impact across communities and really do change lives. So doorstep sport is our concept that underpins absolutely everything. This is about delivering sport and physical activity on a young person's doorstep. So it's not necessarily in a sporting facility. There might not be one within the community. So this is about what exists locally, what assets are there, and that could be a building or it could be a space where activity can happen. We've got examples of stuff happening in multi-storey car parks, in fields, in playgrounds, in school buildings, in leisure centres, in sport pavilions, and everywhere else in between. And it's about providing a local offer that suits the needs of that community. So the other couple of different logos that we've got on the screen there, we love a logo, is all the different variations of what happens at a doorstep sport club. So we've got specific interventions around families and around how do we help families as a unit to be active together. We find a lot of parents aren't engaged with what their children are doing at doorstep sport clubs. So we're doing some research and some projects at the moment around how do we actually involve the whole family unit to create this physical activity habit as a whole, rather than it just being one person in the family is going off to do something that no one else really knows about. We've got bespoke interventions around women and girls work, our Fit and Fed programme, which is around tackling holiday hunger, and we've got volunteering offers, probably very similar to what you guys are thinking about within your own projects around how do we help young people to gain skills, qualifications and experiences that will help them in later life. And we've also got across the middle a whole range of different services that we provide these organisations around networking with each other, research with them and for them, and fundraising services to help them keep their offers going. And then in the top right, we've got this idea of a training academy, which has already been used as a good example earlier on today, where we've got whole suites of qualifications and courses that young people and trusted adults can access to help upskill them and provide a better opportunities for themselves, but also a better provision locally. Next slide, please. What I'm just going to go through a little bit of now is about COVID and is about the pandemic and what the impact of this is locally in the communities in which we operate, because I think it's really important for audiences such as this to understand what is actually going on and how we all might need to think differently about re-engaging these particular communities. So Obviously, the pandemic, lockdown restrictions, all of the stuff that's going on right now is impacting everyone. Every single one of us will have had a different experience through the last 6 or 7 months. But we know that the lived experiences of this crisis is recognised as harsher in low-income areas than in more affluent areas for a whole load of reasons. Next slide, please. I'm just going to throw some stats at you now, which may or may not be surprising, but I think it's important for you to think about them in whatever projects you've got planned next. So we know that nearly 1/3 of lower paid employees have lost their jobs or have been furloughed as a result of the crisis. Now that stat is probably out of date and will get worse as the furlough scheme ends, as job retention scheme kicks in. We know that people are losing their jobs. And if you compare that to the top earners, in a similar context, only 1 in 10 have been similarly affected. So already we're seeing disparities and differences across, depending on what type of job you've got, which I know that you're all very aware of. Next slide, please. Now, this slide I put in on purpose to make people think. So we all know that the coronavirus are awful. We all know that it's far too many. The response is the response. But what I want to show you is the difference, but depending on where you live. So depending on your postcode, the likelihood, the death rates are much different. So apologies that the graph is quite small there, but this represents the different socioeconomic kind of categories across the population. So on the left-hand side of the screen, number 1, that is the poorest areas, the most deprived, and the right-hand side of the screen is the most affluent areas. And I'm not sure if you can see the numbers, they're tiny on my screen, but essentially what I'm showing you is the death rates in lower socioeconomic areas, in poorer areas, are almost double that of richer areas. Now, the reason I'm telling you that, and unfortunately, it probably isn't a surprise, but the reason I'm telling you that, from our perspective as a charity, this means that more young people living in the communities that we work with will experience death related to COVID. They are more likely to know someone that has died as a result of this virus. Now, what that leads to, or what that can lead to, is trauma. And what part of the work that I'll go on to explain a little bit more is around mental health support and need for positive interventions for these communities as a whole, but particularly young people, to help them deal with what's going on right now. This is alien to all of us, but depending on your postcode, there's a higher rate that you're going to know someone that's died. Just let that sink in for a second. Next slide, please. So as we are a sport charity, it would be amiss of me not to show you some sports stats. So we've did our own research back in May and June around kind of the beginning-ish of the lockdown restrictions, just about how much sport and physical activity young people that we engage with were doing. And 68% of them said that they were doing less activity than usual. Now, that might not be a surprise, but what other data has found of general populations is that only 31% of young people said that they were doing less. So we're over double in deprived communities. And in the general population, 46% said they were actually doing more. Now, what we're finding is that activity gap is growing due to a number of factors, including lack of access to digital devices. So, I mean, if I could see all of your faces, I'd be asking you to raise your hands of how many of you took part with your family and your kids in PE with Joe, 9 o'clock on a morning. The young people that we're working with haven't got access, or many of them haven't got access to devices or the internet to enable them to take part online. Lots of them don't have outside spaces in which to do things in the garden, and lots of them just don't have any equipment to just kick a ball about or get a badminton racket out and play in the garden that they also don't have. So I thought it was important just to share that with you today. Next slide, please. So I've started to touch on this already, but the young people that we've been engaging with and the community leaders that we've been talking to us are sharing these experiences with us around what it's actually like at home right now. around these challenging conditions, disrupted routine, which has gone back to normal a little bit, especially with schools reopening, but for some it's still not quite there. This feeling of boredom, isolation, missing friends, resulting in poor choices and antisocial behaviour, and getting involved in things that they wouldn't have done otherwise if they'd been in their normal routine. And I've already talked about their kind of limited private space or access to the internet. Next slide, please. What we have found, though, actually, is the organisations that we work with have been incredibly resilient and have been incredibly adaptable and creative around how they've changed, what they've done and who they've engaged with. So what we're finding that is, whilst some of these organisations historically have only worked with young people, they're now finding that actually they're supporting entire families. There's a bigger, particularly in lockdown, but as we move into kind of further unemployment, this will increase around food delivery, access to food banks, kind of advice on accessing those services. Some organisations did go online and did do some engagement online, and we've got local examples of where they've managed to find funding or partnerships to get devices to young people, which has been great. And then we've had donations of activity packs and sports kit that we've been able to get out to families so that they can actually take part in something at home. We underestimated, I think, the power of just delivering a rugby ball and what that would do for a young person and their family. And some of the stories that we've got are fantastic, and I can share those afterwards. Next slide, please. So I'm here today to talk about us as a charity and the organisations that we represent. And I guess, again, it would be amiss of me not to talk about the pressures that these organisations in our network are facing right now. So they're reporting that their whole structure as an organisation, their finances, their business planning, their kind of fundraising ability, their forward thinking are all suffering as a result of the pandemic. For many of them, it's a voluntary role and they've got pressures elsewhere. For others, it is a paid job and there are just all of these pressures around them right now. But the demand is still high. They're still committed to providing these opportunities for young people and the wider social good it can do. But funding and longer term funding is a particular concern right now of how they access that to enable them to continue. These organisations are at a real risk of disappearing for good from communities, which means you could probably all think of one of these places that I'm talking about, of a small community with no sport facility, no sport club, but the open space that I talked about earlier, or the multi-storey car park or the community centre, is filled with positive experiences for young people. These are at risk right now and will not exist if we don't do something about it. Next slide, please. So I'll bring this to life a little bit now in the context of why we're all here today, and to just share some examples of how we've been working with some corporate partners, many of which are on the call today, and how we've been able to link the two worlds together, because I appreciate for some people on the call today, this might all be a little bit strange. But I guess what I want to share is, just what we have been doing. So I'll start with Wilmot Dixon. And this was a project that unfortunately is still on pause, but we are all committed to getting this going again in some way, shape or form. But this was about enabling a mentoring programme between female staff at Wilmot Dixon and young females in the community in Torvine. And this was about raising aspirations. It was about kind of supporting young people in a pivotal part of their life, kind of 14 to 16-year-olds. And also from Wilmot Dixon's perspective, it was about opening up the world of construction to a female audience and actually showing and demonstrating that there's a whole world inside of construction that could be new. Now, we started this project with training from Street Games to Wilmot Dixon staff around mentoring skills, around upskilling a little bit around the type of communities that they would be working in, and we were all ready to go, and then lockdown hit. So we're still working at the moment around how we reinvigorate that programme and how we help it to look a little bit different, because it can't be done in the way that we wanted it to, but the commitment is there. The second one, just to share, is Centigrate working in partnership with us and Better, which is a leisure provider in Cardiff. That they're in lots of places, but we were particularly working in Cardiff around community cohesion and around actually how can we help Centigrate to engage with the local community and supporting some projects that they had going on. And the way that we did this was through funding a holiday programme of Fit and Fed that I talked about before, which is around providing healthy activities and healthy food for children and young people across school holidays. So you will have all seen in the news, no doubt, around access to free school meal vouchers and the work that Marcus Rashford is doing at the moment in central government. We're lucky, or we're fortunate in Wales, that free school meal vouchers were extended and were available through the summer period, which is great, but that it still isn't accessed by everyone. But what we were doing with Centigrate was around providing provision and engaging with local people. There was also an issue around antisocial behaviour in the leisure centres, and by providing a positive experience, actually the leisure centre staff were able to engage with these young people in a different way. And many of the young people that were causing trouble 12 months ago are now volunteers on their programmes and working towards apprenticeships and training in the leisure industry, which is fantastic. And then the last one that I'll talk about that has actually already been mentioned, which is great, is the partnership we've got at the moment with Cardiff Council and SEWSCAP framework with Chris, Penny and Kevin around a mental health project. So as I've talked already before about the impact of COVID and trauma and isolation and mental health right now, we've identified communities within Cardiff to work with around bringing their doorstep sport clubs back and coming back to activity, and a whole programme of mental health support wrapped around it. So that is training and engaging activities for children and young people themselves to upskill them around their own mental health and how they support their peers, but also for the staff and the volunteers that are supporting and delivering the programmes so that they know how to support the young people and the wider community. We've just started that programme. So we know it's going really well. We haven't got a lot of impact to demonstrate yet because it's literally weeks old, but we're really fortunate and thankful for the funding for that in order to make that happen and to provide positive interventions for young people. Next slide, please. So the last bit, just as the slide is coming up, that I wanted to share with you is about how you can actually get involved. So there's been a couple of references to this across the last few presentations, which has been great, but we aren't, I mean, I am here, if anyone's got cash to give, then please give, but it's more than that. We're not here looking for quick fixes. We're here kind of demonstrating longer term partnerships and how can we actually impact on your business and how can we help you meet the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act ways of working. And for us, it's more than just a financial donation or a kind of volunteering. Corporate volunteering has gone away from and beyond just painting fences and doing a litter pick at your local cricket club. It's more than that now, but I think that's really beneficial. So part of what we're working with a range of different organisations across the UK is around what skills do you have within your companies that these local organisations could benefit from? And by skills, I don't necessarily just mean a mentoring programme, but what about business planning? What about financial sustainability, marketing, risk management, fundraising? If you think about your huge companies right now and all of the skills that you've got with the people within, what a great use of their time it would be to just help another organisation to know more in that space. And mentoring comes into that around actually how can we buddy up people or departments or groups of people with organisations or young people to help kind of transition them onto the next stage of their life. We've got, as I've mentioned already, a training academy, which has got a huge range of courses on, and I'll share a link in the chat box before I go today around what courses we've got available that could benefit your workforce. So although we're a sports charity, we've got hundreds of courses in there around mental health, around resilience, around behaviour change, and we can bespoke all of them to make sure that they're relevant for your audience. But what we also encourage is around actually, if we offer any kind of training, can we do a deal around buy one, give one? So you're upskilling your workforce, but you're also then giving back to communities where we can provide funded training to organisations that possibly can't afford the places themselves. Partnerships is a key thing for us. So our conversations that we have with Chris and Kevin and Penny at SEWSCAP is much more of a bigger conversation. It's not just around give us some cash and we'll do this thing. It's about a wider partnership of how can we get involved in more things? How can we bring people together? How can we connect people locally and then step away? It's much more about our network. And also a challenge for everyone on this call is thinking about what partnerships could you bring that's in your supply chain that could add value or add an experience or will be interested in this world of work. And then lastly, I have put it on there around funding. If anyone is interested in funding specific work that we do, my contact details can be shared after this. Please get in touch just for an exploratory conversation around what we can do. I'd be really interested to just sit and have a virtual coffee with people about how can we get involved and how can we help in a two-way partnership, not just about asking for something from you. We can add value back the other way. So thank you very much for your time today and for giving me this platform. And hopefully I look forward to speaking to some of you again soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. I can personally commend Street Games. In a previous life, I was chair of the Commission for a Sustainable London 2012, and Coca-Cola sponsored a whole series of activities with Street Games around the London Olympics, and it was brilliant. And I'd be really pleased to see the end of the badly painted fence. That's been mentioned twice already today. Okay, so we're still overrunning a little bit, so we're going to move really quickly into some further case studies of how the various contractors in the partnership around the Welsh School are complying with the Act, and then we're going to do a very quick wrap up at the end to try and get your time back. Okay, so over to Andrew from Wilmot Dixon. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Good afternoon, everybody. Very conscious of time. Sorry, is there a slide before that? I think you've jumped to.
So is that the correct slide now, Andrew? Andrew, we can't hear you. Yeah, can I suggest you maybe try switching your camera off, Andrew? I think you might have a connection problem at your end. Okay, I still can't hear Andrew. I don't know if anybody else can.
I can't either.
No, I can't.
I can't either.
I think it's frozen.
Yeah.
Should we move on to the next presentation
yes,
and come back to Andrew?
Yeah, let's move on to the next presentation, please. Yeah, thank you. We've lost the slides now, Rosie. I can't see the slides.
Can you see them now?
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, let's move on to Amanda, and then we'll get back to Andrew if we can. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Amanda Wright, Regional Sustainability Advisor for BAM. Oh, right. Excellent. Thank you, Rosie. So this is our case study. Apologies, it's quite detailed in relation to the delivery of the new Brecon High School. We've chosen this one because it's a more rural location. And the opportunities involved around that, obviously with Powys County Council, 21st century school. It was a new build in relation to a greenfield site, and there's some statistics there in relation to the scheme, and obviously we completed it end of last year, so it's actually quite recent for us. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you very much. Obviously the new school was, it was in the Brecon Beacons, certainly a unique location. It dictated its the design, the materials that we used, that sympathetic location, that keeping that heritage. You know, International Dark Sky Reserve, certainly that's unique, something that we haven't come across before. You know, the modelling of the minimal light pollution for the main scheme and during construction. You know, that watching brief, you know, TPO, you know, the oak that you see on the right hand side, you know, in excess of 400 years old. Great crested newts with a natural resources Wales license. They were removed prior to site and protected during that construction phase. So certainly that protecting the heritage of the environment of the area was retained during the build. Next slide. Please. Thank you very much. What we build is or sort of how we build is important as sort of is what we build in that respect. Real-time monitoring on site is really important to us, that resource efficiency. We only use what we need. You know, we got connected to the grid early, we only use green tariffs. We have really quite detailed monitoring. You see up there on the right hand side the half-hourly metering for electricity supplies. We really do only use what we need to, maximising the materials with a low environmental impact. You know, we've got British steel on site. These are my photographs from my site visits. We have rebar with the UK stamp. Now, we know that's Welsh rebar because it's come from Solstice Steel in Cardiff, the only UK mill in the UK. So it's a local material. It's got 98% recycled content, a really sort of lower carbon footprint on that. The project had really excellent resource efficiency targets that we applied to it, and obviously the SEWSCAP own targets with 98% recycled content. 99 of waste diverted from landfill. Apologies for that. Next slide. Next slide, please. So with the school itself as a learning resource, the pupils had an energy survey. Our design team, and in conjunction with 7Y Energy, engaged the pupils. They looked at their school as it was. What could they improve? You know, I understand it was sort of single glazed windows, you know, it was drafty. They said the lighting was left on all the time. You know, when people went in the rooms, they looked at what they wanted from their new school. As a collaboration, we and our design team have presented the design to them, explained the decisions of the design, how it performed better, and together we looked at the items that could be incorporated. And obviously we think the same in the sense of the high efficiency lighting and smart controls. Some items there that I'm not going to go through, but obviously they're key for that sort of low carbon design delivery. Next slide. So we wanted to extend the opportunity of the new school beyond just Brecon into the sort of county of Powys. So we, with again 7 Energy, we did an event in Newtown. We sponsored the resource efficiency workshop, their waste workshop. We were one of 4 business mentors that went up there, and we chose construction waste, specifically construction packaging, single waste. We presented Brecon High School as a subject, and the students then presented ideas on the top right hand side in areas that they could reduce packaging waste. I mean, that's me in the photograph. It was certainly inspiring them. They certainly inspired me. And I think I took a photograph of one thing that each student learned from that day. And I think the item there is everyone is responsible, is real hope for the future. Next slide. So within this a more rural location, so we wanted to sort of find that local supply chain. You know, we had a meet at the Byther event. We already talked about what we call the Powys spend. I mean, Sophie Howard just mentioned earlier about that. You know, £4.5 million was spent with that local power supply chain. You know, that's 28% of the subcontractor build cost. Overall, 17 out of the 25 subcontractors we had on site were Welsh, which was excellent. And we've got a quote there from John Jones. It's the first time we've worked with them, and they work with us. Great relationship. We'd love to work with them again. But interesting, what he said is that actually not a lot happens up there, not as much as other areas like Cardiff and Swansea. So, we've done that direct benefit to the local community. And actually, this is one of the Paris's local objectives, that people in Paris will experience a stable and thriving economy. So, we've really delivered on that objective. Next slide. Jess? Jess?
I'm on mute, apologies. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jess Morgan, Community Benefits Coordinator with BAM. So for the next few slides, we're just going to talk about the social value element. And what I've got from the event today is that the idea of getting into communities early, getting out there and building networks and creating a firm understanding of need, local business, and how we can enhance communities is key in terms of social impact. So when it came to investing locally in terms of business, it was about getting out there early and looking at how we could work resourcefully with a local business who Ministry of Furniture shared the same ethos as us in terms of their commitment to equal opportunities, being a descendant of Remploy, how we could work collaboratively on community projects, but not just to create an opportunity and an investment for Brecon as a particular project, but to create a partnership for future opportunities. So they're now a member of our supply chain and have worked on a number of projects following Brecon, which is really good. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of local employment, again, working early on the community benefits plan and scoping local areas, it's very much a forward-thinking network approach. We've already heard from organisations such as Street Games. So it's not just about working with your job centre pluses, Careers Wales. It's also looking and thinking innovatively in how we can incorporate employability into other ways in order to reach the harder to reach groups. In our initial scoping, one of our targets was to look at how we could support those furthest away from the job market back into work. The project created over 40 new job opportunities, and of that, we're really happy to say that 70% of the people recruited onto that job at that particular time were unemployed. And around that, they then had support with regards to any barriers that they were facing at the time. Thank you. Next slide. So in terms of our future thinking, Prosperous Wales, and kind of raising awareness of the construction industry, it was about using the Brecon project as not just a build, as what we've heard already today, but a learning tool for the community. And this really helped us to connect, to get into schools, first and foremost with Brecon High School, but the surrounding schools and colleges. And I guess in terms of a forward-thinking element to this, it's not just about the here and now. It's about addressing the future skills gap. So the work we hope that we did on that project, will continue, and hopefully we did raise some aspirations to hopefully address the future skills gap. Our approach on the Brecon High School project was not, just I guess to move away from your ad hoc school engagement, and to create meaningful relationships through our engagement. So that was about, again, early engagement. Understanding, what are the priorities of those schools? What are the values of the school that we were building? What are they looking for, and how can we supplement their curriculum? So a lot of the engagement we did was about opening their eyes to the world of work, exposing them to male and female role models from the industry, linking into STEM learning and raising their awareness of, emerging technology in the construction industry. For those, there's over 2,000 different job roles, as we know, in the construction industry, and things like taster days, getting them to in terms of contextualized learning, to get involved and to try out in a taster day different aspects of construction. We hope really to give them a sort of a feel for the industry. Again, following the project, we didn't want to leave it there. So it's about, you know, educating not only the young people, but also teachers and parents. So where we could engage teachers and parents to continue that learning, and for example, when they're talking about STEM, to make those links with construction. That's what we wanted from the project. So during the project, all of our targets are recorded on the social value portal, so we can kind of demonstrate the impact that we have. So we did exceed our targets in terms of education, and we do keep in contact with those schools now, which is great. Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks, Jess. Next slide. Okay, so we talk about the legacy, and this is really sort of, you know, the Brecon High School is that legacy. You know, it's those relationships they've explained in this case study. You know, the community, the supply chain, the client, the pupils that you know, making that school a learning outcome, and the new school. I mean, this is an as-built picture you see on the top right. We completed it last year, and yet it already sits sympathetically in relation to its heritage in the national park. And yet inside we have this modern, comfortable learning space, this inspiring space for the future generation. It's a community asset in itself. You know, we invested £20,000 refurbishing the sports pavilion adjacent to the school, and we've not left together. We have delivered a highly efficient, well-insulated, low-carbon building, a contribution towards Paris's school estates for their zero carbon by 2030. Sorry, but I think the key for this is we will continue that relationship after completion. We are going back to seasonal commissioning, but that's not just that tick in the box for BREEAM. You know, we are really interested in making sure that our buildings, certainly Brecon High School, you know, performs as it's been designed, you know, to address that performance gap for the buildings operation with the climate emergency. And we had planned to go back and do POEs this year. Unfortunately, that has been postponed. But we hope to go back in. And recently, I understand we've gone back in and helped the school turn off their air handling units in relation to COVID, with the students coming back. So we hope to continue that relationship post that sort of year after PC. Thank you for your time. That's finished.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. I think Andrew is back now. So Rosie, can we go back to Andrew's slides, please? And we'll cover off Andrew's presentation. We are running a little short of time, so I'm going to cut the Menti poll at the end. I don't think we'll have time to do it because I want to give time for the presenters to speak. So we'll run through the presentations and then I'll do a bit of a wrap up at the end. So Andrew, over to you. And yeah, thank you very much for your patience.
Thanks, Sean. Apologies, everybody. There's many things you can prepare for with a presentation, but IT failure isn't one of them, I'm afraid. Okay, so recognising the shortage of time, quickly going to take you through the story of Llys Cadwyn, our partnership with RCT, and their journey through the art of the possible on what is a significant piece of infrastructure in the centre of Pontypridd. The Wellbeing of Future Generations Act has really underpinned the way we've approached the project, and as we've heard today, it's a world-leading piece of legislation, but it's also a really important platform around which we can redefine what we understand by value, in my belief. It will help us to move from cost and capital funding stream-based systems potentially into creating much more sustainable whole life value, almost economic ecosystems. So just flicking through the 7 key themes of the Act, if we could just flick onto the first slide, please. A prosperous Wales. Like others have presented this morning and this afternoon, we focus very much on delivering local spend. 80% of the spend on this project was with Welsh-based SMEs. The economic multiplier effect of that spend was £1.85. So that the effect of this project on the Welsh economy was over £70 million. But it's important that whilst at that macro level those numbers are hit, what it does really filter down to is individual stories and individual people. So we can flick on, please. Shemaine, or as known as Shaz. Shaz was one of the people we engaged through the Careers Change programme. She was working through some difficult personal circumstances. Through collaboration with Communities for Work, we employed Shaz directly. She completed an apprenticeship in plant. She's now a qualified plant operator, and she remains employed with us and has a bright future in the industry. There were 242 other Shazes that we gave opportunities to through this project. And it's really important to recognise that this is about individuals. When I was talking about sort of economic ecosystems, it's about people, and the generation of wealth was going to come from all of these individuals. And thinking about the whole structure of employment, we need to tackle every single stream within the employment structure. That's how the wealth will be generated, and that's how we'll create prosperity for all. Can we move on, please? Resilient Wales. There was a big focus for this scheme on creating a building which was low impact, low energy, low carbon, as others have talked about. And it's great to hear that there is this common language developing now across projects in Wales, because it will take not just individual heroics, it will require everybody to jump on board with this agenda. Can you just flick on, please? So creating resilient buildings for the future. The building has a CHP plant, combined heat and power plant, to maximise the use of the energy on the site. We've got extensive rainwater harvesting. The drainage has been designed with a capacity to deal with and to account for future climate change, as far as we understand it at the moment. There's PVs. We've built in electrical charging points, but also extensions and infrastructure for that to extend that in the future. And importantly, something that Sophie picked up on in her keynote speech around spaces. What we've learned through COVID is the nature and change of the use of office spaces. These buildings have been designed around flexibility, which harks back to a phrase first coined in the early 70s by the architect Alex Gordon, around long life, loose fit. So these are adaptable spaces that can accommodate change for the future. You flick on, please. A healthier Wales. People's physical and mental well-being, never more highlighted, I suppose, in the last 6 months. Huge strain on us all through this period. Could you just flick on, please? But we were already extensively on this journey. As a sector, mental health is a significant problem in construction as a sector, let alone the issues in the community more widely. So this was very much on our radar before COVID. But on this particular scheme, one of our community managers and a past head teacher, she created resources to help students manage their mental well-being during lockdown. And giving them skills about looking after their mental well-being during self-isolation. The schools have had a huge challenge just dealing with education, but we went into this with nobody really equipped with the skills to manage stress, to manage the fear, worry, and the symptoms as that's created. And we are storing up a big problem for ourselves. So this is going to be a key feature of our work and focus going forward. Can you move on, please? Thank you. And again, please. A more equal Wales. Again, this is about people. So Alex was put through our Building Lives Academy. She had significant barriers to employment, and we were focusing on upskilling her, giving her confidence, giving her skills in CV writing, interview techniques, as well as specific construction upskilling. And she was unemployed after being let go by Domino's Pizza. Her confidence has grown. She's gained CSCS and HNS cards, and she was later offered a position at the Police Cadwyn Development and appointed as the project's hygiene and welfare operative. And she's still working there today and still enjoying her job. So this is all about these people, as I've said, and impacting on those lives and creating that economic engine to drive prosperity right throughout the system. Thanks. Can you move on, please? And again, thanks. Wales of cohesive communities, leaving legacies in the heart of Pontypridd. It's really important that the project itself reaches out into the community and connects in a very definitive way. The Bowls Pavilion, a key part of that community, located near the War Memorial Park, in quite a dilapidated state. We worked with the community to refurbish that and provide them with an improved and upscaled facility. And again, the dilapidated buildings have a real impact on people's psyche, and they have a very negative impact. So as well as the construction of Police Cadwyn itself, being able to improve key facilities around that, allowed that project to reach into and connect more holistically with the community. Can you move on, please? Thank you. And again, thanks. So we're very much supporters of the Welsh Government strategy 2050, Cymraeg 2050, 1 million Welsh speakers. Our community manager is a Welsh speaker. We issued bilingual newsletters and letter drops were delivered throughout the scheme. Every one of our people that was bilingual wore a pin to indicate that, to indicate they had that ability to converse in Welsh if people desired to do so. And we worked with the Welsh Medium School, Ysgol Gyffin Rhyd y Waun, and they supported educational initiatives in STEM workshops, careers fairs, mock interviewing, and Welsh site visits. Thanks. Can you move on? And again, please. Thank you. A globally responsible Wales. It is now or never. Most authorities have declared climate emergencies. Most are working towards a 2030 target of net zero carbon. Our new sustainability strategy is doing that. We will be delivering all buildings by 2030 at net zero carbon. Police Cadwyn has pushed the boundaries on many of these targets and aspirations. For example, the recycled content that's exceeded the Welsh Government target significantly. The project achieved, in terms of measurement on its target emission rates of CO2, the target was 11.3 kilograms of CO2 per metre squared. We achieved 6.1, BREEAM excellent ratings, and 60% of materials sourced from certifiable sources. So the provenance of those materials are known. So what we have here, and I've rattled through this fairly quickly. What we have is a much wider story, and you can see from everybody's contributions this morning that Wales is starting to really think about the infrastructure and the delivery and its impact in a much wider context than we need schools, we need offices, and it's fantastic to see and to be a part of that journey with the Welsh authorities and the Welsh Government. Just finish with an old Chinese proverb which says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now, it isn't too late. We are at the beginning of this journey, but as you can see from the contributions today, there's a huge amount of connected thinking going on, and there's a huge amount of work being done, which is driving us in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andrew. I think what we're seeing is a wide variety of ways in which various players can actually contribute to the Act. So yeah, if we can move very quickly now, please, Rosie, on to the final presentation. Thank you. So Amanda.
Hi, good afternoon all. So I'm Amanda Svoboda, the CSR coordinator for Kia Construction. So I'm going to share with you a case study from our recently completed project, the Croesau Comprehensive School in Cwmbran. So can I have the next slide, please? So a bit of project background. The project was procured through SEWSCAP and the Welsh Government 21st Century Schools programme. So we had a sustainable and collaborative tender and delivery process through the framework and collaborative working from stage 1, with an integrated client team in line with the 5 ways of working. Framework and project-specific KPIs were established collaboratively with Torfaen in line with their wellbeing plan and objectives. So some examples: construction stage, green and school active travel plans, carbon reduction through a fabric use of recycled materials, focus on opportunities within the Torfaen postcode, health and wellbeing talks with school users, improving local skills through local apprenticeships. Can I have the next slide, please? So some examples of how the project made a positive contribution of being a prosperous Wales are local spend, so employing local SMEs, training and upskilling. There's some more examples on the screen. Can I have the next slide, please? So we worked with local organisations to provide employment, work experience and apprenticeship opportunities, focusing on long-term unemployed and people furthest away from the job market. We held a Meet the Buyer event prior to the project starting, where 80 local SMEs attended, and we held a Meet the Supplier event midway. These were supported by Business Wales. Thank you. So to extend our links to the wider community, we set up a Careers Wales business class partnership with West Monmouth School. Our trainees and graduates and pupils from the school organised and coordinated a DIY SOS style Make a Difference Day, which was aired on BBC to promote careers in construction. We engaged with our supply chain and the school through our CITB funded project, Go Construct Engage. We hosted a Careers Wales webinar, which was available to all schools across Wales via a live stream with a Q&A session. In conjunction with a local dementia unit at Cwmbran House, and to raise awareness of dementia, we organised the virtual dementia tour. The visit was held on the school sports day and allowed staff and pupils to appreciate and understand what living with dementia might be like. With the large number of students, the use of Matterport 3D imagery, oh, sorry, this is the same slide. Thank you. So with the large number of students and the use of Matterport 3D imagery, ensured we were able to engage with as many stakeholders as possible, including pupils, teachers and clients, to visualise project progress. The school was so impressed with the imagery and the headsets that they introduced it into their ICT curriculum. Have the next slide, please. We incorporated innovative construction methodologies and techniques at all stages of the project to limit the use of natural resources and to reduce the amount of CO2 generated from our actions. At the beginning of the project, this included the soil stabilisation, which eliminated the requirement to divert almost 500 tonne of material off-site by improving the ground in situ. In turn, this helped us to divert almost 10,000 tonne of virgin aggregate from site, reducing the numbers of lorries on the roads significantly and saving 18 tonne of carbon emissions. That's it from me, thank you.
Thank you very much. As I said, we're very much out of time, so we're not going to run the final session. What I would like to try and do is first of all clear my throat and then sum up a little bit. So I think what we've heard today is how the the kind of juxtaposition of government policy, legislation, procurement, and then some very engaged contractors in the supply chain can actually move mountains. I've certainly been inspired by everything I've heard today. I hope you have too. Clearly, there's a lot to learn, and Sophie's challenge to procurement to be able to do more and more consistently is very well heard. The supply chain school is here to support contractors, subcontractors, SMEs in Wales with what we do best, which is about sharing knowledge. So thank you all for joining today. Apologies if we weren't able to do the final exercise, but I know people do need to drop off at 1:30. There will be a recording of this session and the slides will be shared. So thank you very much for joining and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Cheers.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.